Here's a dark horse for the 1990 RPG showdown. Deep Dungeon IV is the final game in the Deep Dungeon series. The first two were for the Famicom Disk System, and the first three were published by Square. Nobody seems to be sure why Hummingbird Soft took this one to Asmik. Perhaps after the poor reception of the previous games, and Square having their own big RPG on the schedule, they didn't want to pick it up. The series has always been first-person dungeon crawlers in the vein of wizardry, but the fourth game makes quite a few changes. The first two lacked any kind of town, while the third only had a single town at the top of the dungeon. Deep Dungeon IV, on the other hand, is a bit of an expansive world. There's an overworld that you wander through, and taking different exits from maps will take you to very different places. From the starting town you can only get to another bigger town, and then that bigger town will let you get to a forest, and the forest has two dungeons of its own attached to it, plus a path to another town. It's a much more expansive world for Deep Dungeon IV. And while this style of game is lagging a bit behind what computers were doing, it was fairly novel for the Famicom. Another big change is the addition of a party. The previous Deep Dungeons just had one character against the entire dungeon. Deep Dungeon IV gives you the ability to recruit up to 3 additional characters. You start out solo, and I didn't make it far enough in the game to recruit anybody. It takes a while before you reach that point, and unfortunately my format means that I only have about an hour or so to record footage in. So once again, RPGs get the short end of the stick here. The story for Deep Dungeon IV is pretty simple. Your father killed the evil wizard, but the evil wizard came back. There you go, that's it. One weird thing about your character when you start out, you begin with the best gear available. You have to equip it, of course, by hitting the B button to open a menu, then going to items and using them rather than equipping them. But early on, there's no need to save up for equipment. You have the best stuff that those stores will sell you. The best thing you can spend your money on are the inns where you can recover your health. You also save at the inn, but it is a different option in the menu. So don't overlook doing that, because when you die, you restore your game to your previous save. As you'd expect, while you wander around, you'll have random encounters with monsters. You have the standard options to fight, run away, use an item, cast spells. The combat at the start of the game isn't too difficult, and enemies seem to miss a whole lot. You also start with a very weak healing spell. It restores about 2 hits worth of damage to you. The time it took to level up seemed to be alright, maybe just a little bit slow due to the size of the maps. There does seem to be a bit of enemy scaling. As I leveled up, I started encountering new enemies in the forest. You don't recover any health or magic when you level up, so you'll have to go back to an inn to fully recover. When you defeat an enemy, you also don't get any cash. You'll have to find cash in treasure chests that are scattered around the map, or complete quests. When you have an encounter out in the dungeons, or even just while you're walking around town, you're actually given multiple options for how to react. You can walk away, talk to them, search the area, use an item, or fight them. Though in every encounter I had, it didn't let you do anything wild like attack random townspeople. One thing you'll notice while walking around is that the input is fast. If you hold down up, your character will practically run. It actually makes it a little bit difficult to navigate in single steps. I'm glad that the game moves fast. A lot of these first-person dungeon crawlers have been pretty pokey, but this is too far in the other direction. When Deep Dungeon IV was released, it was by all accounts a massive flop. It seems to have picked up a small following in the years since, though. After the notoriously bad Deep Dungeon III, Deep Dungeon IV has a reputation as one of the friendlier dungeon crawlers on the Famicom. And I have to say, it is a pretty big improvement. You can tell that this was a game designed in 1989. Although the combat system's pretty traditional, the other aspects of the gameplay are pretty unusual on the Famicom at this point. Deep Dungeon IV was a modern game design for the time, in a way that the wizardry games on the Famicom weren't. I feel like if it wasn't released right at the heart of the RPG showdown of 1990, Deep Dungeon IV probably would have done pretty well for itself. But it was released on the same day as another dungeon crawler that was much more popular, less than a month after another entry in the most popular dungeon crawler series, and was surrounded on all sides by much more popular RPGs. They never stood a chance.